School resource officer Randall Voss had walked the halls of Jefferson Middle School for 6 years, and in that time, he had built a private sense of who belonged in the building and who didn't, a sense that had never once been seriously tested, because the district's own hiring pipeline had, until recently, produced a staff that matched, almost entirely, his unspoken assumptions about what a teacher was supposed to look like. The woman he found in room 214 that Saturday morning in mid-August, 3 weeks before the new school year began, did not match those assumptions. And Voss decided, within the first 10 seconds of encountering her, that the mismatch was itself sufficient grounds for suspicion. Dr. Angela Whitfield had arrived at the building before 7, using the key the outgoing principal had given her during the transition meeting 2 weeks earlier, planning to spend her Saturday quietly reorganizing the classroom that would, come September, no longer function as a classroom at all, but as her new office. A small, symbolic act of claiming the space before the chaos of opening week made any quiet reflection impossible. She had brought boxes, a step stool, and a folder of notes about the building's history that she'd been compiling since accepting the position. And she was standing on the step stool taking down a decade of a retiring teacher's bulletin board displays when Voss's flashlight beam swept across the room from the doorway. "Ma'am, what are you doing in this building?" "I'm the new principal, getting a head start on my office before the semester starts." She stepped down from the stool, unhurried, gesturing toward the folder and boxes spread across the desk. "I have a key from Dr. Ellison during the transition." "I don't have any record of a new principal starting today, and I don't have any record of you being cleared for building access this weekend." "That's likely just a gap in the district's summer notification schedule. I don't start officially until the 15th, but Dr. Ellison gave me building access early specifically so I could prepare. You're welcome to call the district office on Monday to confirm, or you can call Dr. Ellison directly right now since it's still early enough he might—" "I need you to step away from that desk and show me some identification." She produced a driver's license without hesitation and a folder containing her offer letter and district onboarding paperwork, materials she'd brought specifically because she'd anticipated exactly this kind of question from someone unfamiliar with the transition, though she hadn't anticipated the particular tone in which the question would ultimately be asked, or the speed with which identification would escalate into something considerably less routine. Voss studied the documents with a slow, deliberate skepticism that had less to do with their actual contents and everything to do with a private conviction he'd carried into the room before he'd asked a single question. "This says you're supposed to start on the 15th. That's not today." "That's correct. Today I'm here informally, with permission, to begin preparing the space. Dr. Ellison can confirm that directly. I'm not calling anybody at 7 in the morning based on paperwork I can't verify. I need you to step out of the building while I sort this out. Officer, I've shown you my identification, my offer letter, and my onboarding documentation from the district. I don't understand what additional verification you believe you need before allowing me to continue working in the office I've been assigned." The specificity and calm of her answer, rather than registering as reasonable, registered with Voss as exactly the kind of confident pushback his private, unexamined instinct had already decided, before he'd walked through the doorway, that this particular situation warranted treating with escalating suspicion rather than good faith. "I'm going to need you to come with me to the front office. I am the incoming principal of this school, and this is, functionally, my own office you're currently standing in. You'll have every opportunity to explain that once we've sorted this out properly." Part 2. The wrong kind of quiet Saturday. What happened next unfolded with the particular surreal quality of a misunderstanding that both parties, in different ways, could sense was accelerating past the point where either of them could easily stop it. Angela, calm and precise, cataloging every detail of an encounter she understood, even in the moment, was almost certainly going to matter far beyond this one Saturday morning. Voss increasingly committed to a course of action his own private certainty had set in motion before he'd bothered to actually consider the evidence sitting in his own hands. "I'm not going anywhere until you've called Dr. Ellison," Angela said, her voice remaining level even as Voss reached for his radio. "That's a simple 5-minute call that resolves this entirely. I need you to comply with my instructions first." "I am complying, in the sense that I haven't moved from this spot and I've provided every document you've asked for. What I'm declining to do is leave a building I have every legal right to be in, based on an unverified suspicion that a single phone call would resolve. Voss's radio crackled, his voice tight as he requested backup for what he characterized to dispatch as a possible trespassing situation, uncooperative subject, a characterization that bore little resemblance to the calm, document-producing woman standing in front of him, but that would nonetheless shape how the two additional officers who arrived 11 minutes later approached the scene. By the time the second and third officers arrived, Angela had been standing in the same spot for nearly 20 minutes, her boxes and folders still spread across the desk exactly where she'd left them. Her composure fraying at the edges, not into panic, but into a controlled, simmering frustration that came from watching a situation she understood, with total clarity, could be resolved with a single phone call, instead metastasize into something considerably larger through nothing but institutional stubbornness. Officer Voss, I need you to understand that every minute this continues is a minute you're going to have to account for once Dr. Ellison confirms exactly what I've been telling you since you walked through that door. Cuff her, Voss said instead, to the newly arrived officers, his own certainty having calcified past the point where any new information, including the district paperwork still sitting untouched on the desk beside him, was likely to change his course. They cuffed her. Angela did not resist. 15 years in education administration, much of it spent navigating exactly the kind of institutional friction that came from being underestimated in rooms she had every right to occupy, had taught her precisely when physical or verbal resistance served her interests, and when it only handed an already committed authority figure further justification for escalation. She stood, hands cuffed behind her back, in the classroom that would have been her office in 3 weeks, and said, with a calm that carried far more weight than raised anger would have, I want it noted, for whatever record eventually gets made of this morning, that I complied fully, provided complete documentation, and was detained anyway. They walked her to a patrol car parked outside the building's main entrance, and it was there, in the parking lot, under the flat gray light of an early August morning, that a car pulled in. Dr. Marcus Ellison, the outgoing principal, arriving early himself to finish a few last administrative tasks before his own retirement took full effect. Recognizing Angela immediately, even from across the lot, and understanding, with a sinking, furious clarity, exactly what he was looking at. What is happening here? He was out of his car and crossing the lot before Voss had fully registered his arrival. Officer, why is Dr. Whitfield in handcuffs? Sir, we've got a possible trespassing situation. I'm not sure who. This is Dr. Angela Whitfield. She is this school's incoming principal, effective in 3 weeks, and I personally gave her a key and explicit permission to access this building today. I can produce the email confirming exactly that, right now, on my phone, if you'll give me 30 seconds. Voss's expression, for the first time that morning, showed something other than certainty. Part 3. What 20 minutes cost the district. The email, retrieved from Ellison's phone within the promised 30 seconds, confirmed every detail Angela had already provided nearly half an hour earlier. Her hiring, her start date, her explicit early access permission, time-stamped from a conversation 2 weeks prior that any reasonable verification process would have surfaced in minutes, rather than the 20 it had actually taken. Minutes during which a woman with every legal right to be in that building had instead been detained and handcuffed on the strength of nothing but an officer's initial, unexamined suspicion. The cuffs came off. Ellison's fury, controlled but unmistakable, carried through the rest of that Saturday morning as he insisted on documenting every detail of the encounter before Angela had even had the chance to fully process what had happened to her. I want to be direct about something, Angela said, once the immediate crisis had passed and she and Ellison sat together in what would soon be her office, the boxes and folders still scattered across the desk, exactly as they'd been when Voss first walked in. I don't believe Officer Voss randomly decided to escalate a routine identification check into a full detention because of any single piece of evidence in front of him. I believe he decided, within the first several seconds of seeing me in this room, that I didn't belong here, and every subsequent piece of documentation I provided simply wasn't sufficient to overcome that initial assumption, because the assumption was never actually about the paperwork. I want to know if this is the first time, Ellison said, his voice tight with an anger that had not yet found its full outlet. I intend to find out, and I intend for this district to answer for it regardless of what I find. What the district's subsequent review found once Ellison, and 3 weeks later Angela herself in her new capacity as principal, pushed for a full accounting of Voss's 6-year tenure was a pattern considerably more troubling than either of them had initially anticipated. 4 prior complaints, spanning 3 years, each alleging a similar dynamic. A staff member of color, encountered in circumstances Voss found unfamiliar or unexpected, subjected to a level of scrutiny and escalation that white staff members in comparable situations, according to the complaints, had never experienced. All 4 had been resolved through the district's internal review process, with no more than an informal conversation. None escalated to the school board, none cross-referenced against each other in any way that might have revealed the pattern before a 5th incident happened to involve the school's own incoming principal. "I want to understand something," Angela said during the school board's emergency session convened the following month, standing before the assembled trustees in the same composed, precise manner she'd maintained through the entirety of her own encounter. 4 prior complaints over 3 years, all describing a nearly identical pattern, all resolved informally, with no meaningful investigation and no connection drawn between them. I am not here primarily to discuss what happened to me on one Saturday morning in August, painful as that morning was. I am here because I am now responsible for the safety and treatment of every student and staff member who walks through this building's doors. And I have just learned, in the most personal way possible, that this district's process for identifying and addressing exactly this kind of pattern has failed at least 4 times before it happened to fail on me. The board's response, formalized over the following 2 months, established a new district-wide policy requiring any complaint alleging discriminatory conduct by school resource officers to be automatically cross-referenced against the officer's full complaint history and reviewed by an independent panel rather than resolved informally at the individual school level. A structural change explicitly designed to prevent exactly the kind of quiet, unconnected pattern that had allowed 4 prior warnings to pass without meaningful consequence. Officer Voss was reassigned away from student-facing duties pending a full review. A review that, 6 weeks later, resulted in his termination from the school district's security contract, though not from the broader police department. A distinction that troubled Angela considerably, even as she acknowledged it fell outside her own institutional authority to change. Room 214 became Angela Whitfield's office that September, the same desk where her documents had sat untouched for 20 minutes on a Saturday morning in August, now holding a framed photograph of her first faculty meeting as principal, taken on a day she'd approached with considerably more composure than the building's own security had initially extended to her. She kept, in a drawer of that same desk, the folder of onboarding paperwork she'd brought that August morning, not as a trophy, but as a quiet working reminder of exactly how little even complete, unambiguous documentation had mattered against an assumption formed before a single document was ever produced. "I think about the 4 teachers before me sometimes," she told a local education reporter in the single interview she gave about the incident once the district's policy changes had been finalized. 4 people who experienced some version of what happened to me and were told each time that it wasn't serious enough to investigate properly. I got a policy change because of what happened in my own soon-to-be office on a Saturday morning with an outgoing principal who happened to arrive at exactly the right moment to intervene. The 4 people before me didn't have that. I'd like this district to remember that the fix that came out of my case was never really about me. It was about making sure the 5th complaint like mine gets taken as seriously as it should have been taken the first time. The end.